everyone, welcome back, and today I'm reviewing Golden Corral in Royal Palm Beach, Florida. So, Golden Corral is one of the few buffets still left in America that's still operational, and there's many locations across the country. This is the only location in the entire South Florida region. We walk in, it actually wasn't as crowded as I thought it would be, which is surprising because usually that place is flooded with people. We sit down, grab a plate, and then you have a whole buffet to choose from. You have salads, you have a hot station, carving station, pizza, desserts. I mean, everything you could ever imagine is in this buffet. Service is just okay. You just get a waitress to fill up your drinks and take away your dirty plates. That's about all they do, but it's mainly just about the food here. So let's get into reviewing some of that food. So first we have here some nachos that I made using some tortilla chips, refried beans, some rice, and some taco meat. The taco meat, everything of that just kind of tasted basic, and this is going to be a pretty much even trend amongst all the food that I'm going to talk about that I had. Everything there is just kind of basic. I don't know any other way to describe it. There were a couple hits though, so I will talk about that. So it looks like I had some zucchini on my plate, and I also got some pot roast with some potatoes in its own kind of gravy. Now the pot roast was pretty decent. It was surprisingly a little dry, which I don't understand how if there was so much sauce. The potatoes were actually cooked to perfection, very soft. The pot roast actually was not that bad, and it was one of the highlights out of the whole meal actually. The other thing that I got was the meatloaf covered in this gravy. Now personally, I don't know if your mom ever made meatloaf for you, but when I eat meatloaf, there is no gravy. It's just covered in like a thin layer of ketchup on top. Sometimes mustard, depending on who makes it for you. But it was just okay. Like I said, most of the items here are going to be very just okay, and this one was just okay. It was just kind of meh. Not the best meatloaf I've ever had, but it was edible. So my boyfriend actually ended up getting some green beans, some broccoli, and some fried rice. Fried rice was alright. Green beans were just steamed. They weren't buttered or anything. Same with the broccoli. So there were no flavors to them, no butter, just the vegetables themselves. Lastly, he got a yeast roll. Yeast rolls are actually pretty good there. However, I'm actually very disappointed in Golden Corral. Once upon a time, they used to have a very large bread selection with a lot of different butters and spreads to put on there. And the best spread to put on there was honey butter. Couldn't find it anywhere. I even asked somebody and they were like, well, I don't know. That wasn't really cool because the best thing about those yeast rolls was putting the honey butter on. The next round that we ended up getting, I got a little bit of the sirloin off the grill, some cornbread, a slice of cheese pizza, and some pulled pork with some traditional sauce and some spicy sauce. So let's talk about the steak. Steak, basic. Definitely needed to put a lot of salt and pepper on there, and if I could have found some butter, probably would have put it on there too. Unfortunately, the piece that I got had a crap ton of gristle, so a lot of it was completely inedible. But again, it's a buffet. You can go back and get as much as you want. The pizza was alright. It was one of the better items on the plate. One of the better items actually out of the entire meal as well. The pizza was actually piping hot, which I can't say for all the other items. The other items were just kind of, I want to say warm, but not piping. The pulled pork was just okay. It was very dry. And I mean very dry. Even the amount of sauce that I put on could not help how dry it was. And I put a lot of spicy sauce on there. Couldn't taste the spice. I don't know if that's because I'm spice tolerant, but I put a lot of spicy on there and I didn't feel anything. No burn, no nothing. So the last thing on the plate was the cornbread, and oh my god, am I so disappointed in Golden Corral. What an embarrassment to cornbread this was. I've never had something in my entire life that tasted like nothing. It's like the texture was there. The look of it was there. Everything about it screamed cornbread except for the flavor. There was no flavor. It was non-existent. It was absent of flavor. I've never experienced anything like this before. I've never really said anything was terrible until I had this cornbread. It was the worst thing I've had at Golden Corral ever. And maybe one of the worst things I've ever had in my life. I mean, there just was no taste at all. all. I've never, it's such an odd thing to experience, and this is why I do it, so that way you don't have to. Lastly, the last thing on my plate was some honey chicken, and the honey chicken was actually pretty good. That was one of the best items out of the entire night, in my opinion. The breading was good, the flavor of the honey chicken itself was great, and I would suggest if you're going for quality, load up on the honey chicken. So the next plate of food that I got, I kind of needed a little bit of palate cleanser just because I was eating such heavy food that I needed a little lightness. So I ended up getting some broccoli and cheese soup, another yeast roll, some watermelon, some strawberries, a slice of orange, and some bourbon straight chicken. So we'll talk about the soup first. The soup was actually pretty good. Like, I was very, very happy with the soup. Mind you, I know it's pre-made, sent in a bag, and all they do is cut it open and pour it into the dish. But I digress. We won't think about that. I added a lot of black pepper just because that's my preference, and it was pretty good. I actually ended up dunking my yeast roll into it just because I wish I would have had the butter and didn't have anything to dunk it in. The fruit was actually very fresh. I could tell that out of all of the food that I had, the fruit was the freshest thing. Like, they definitely had just cut the watermelon that day, probably that hour. And then the last thing on the plate was the bourbon street chicken, which again, I recommend it. It had a lot of flavor. My boyfriend didn't like it so much, but he's very particular about what he likes and doesn't like. But I thought it was full of flavor. It had saltiness. It definitely had a sweetness to it. And I definitely recommend having at least a little sample of it. On my boyfriend's plate, he ended up getting some french fries, onion ring, and a little bit of lettuce and cucumber. Lettuce and cucumber, again, very fresh. I feel like their salad section probably is the freshest out of all of the food there. Onion rings were basic onion rings, no complaints, tasted like onion rings. Fries were a little meh. Not the best fries I've ever had. And of course, he had to go for his cottage cheese, which he loves. And I just tried for the first time not too long ago, and I'm pretty sure that I like it. So cottage cheese, pretty good, pretty fresh. Lastly, we're gonna move on to everyone's favorite about going to buffets, dessert. So on my plate, I had a little bit of chocolate cake, some banana pudding, a lemon meringue pie, a brownie, chocolate covered marshmallow, and a little piece of fudge that's wedged right underneath the meringue pie. So the chocolate cake was somewhat moist. I would say average. It's like you just made it from a box, so, you know, not bad, not terrible. The banana pudding was really watery. Usually it's pretty thick. This one was very watery. I was actually kind of disappointed because that's one of my favorite things to get at Golden Corral. Marshmallow was pretty good. So what you do with the marshmallows is there's a fondue fountain. You stick it with the toothpick and run it underneath the fountain. It's as good as any chocolate covered thing would be. The brownies were okay. A little bit less enjoyable than the cake, and I really liked the fudge. I think the fudge was the best thing on the plate. The lemon meringue couldn't really finish. I was getting really full. The meringue was very, very good. The lemon gelatin that was underneath, I don't want to say it's gelatin, I can't say it's pudding either, was pretty good, but just couldn't finish it, and it was neither here nor there anyway. Boyfriend's plate, he had a chocolate pie, a cookie, a vanilla cupcake, some carrot cake, and some fudge. The cupcake was really good, just your basic average vanilla cupcake. I wish there would be more frosting on it though. That would be my one criticism. The chocolate cookie was dry as the Sahara. I think the cookie and the pulled pork need to become friends because they're the driest things I've ever eaten. The chocolate pie was very good. It's almost like a pudding with some whipped cream on top. The carrot cake's always good there. I've never had an experience where the carrot cake wasn't good. It was very moist. And I don't know what it is about carrot cake, but it's always good. Which is funny because I would say it's people's least favorite item. And lastly, he also got some chocolate pudding. Chocolate pudding is chocolate pudding. If you've made it from a box, you've made the same pudding. So all in all, my experience at Golden Corral this time and every time was just meh. For the price, it's all you can eat. Who's complaining, right? So the price is usually about $15 for dinner. But for all the food, I think it's a good value. If you're a person that eats a smaller portion of food, there's no way I would ever recommend this restaurant. There's too many restaurants out there that can give you a smaller portion at the same price point and you can get a quality meal. So this is one of those restaurants where it's good for some people, which makes it a little harder to rate. But based off of my experience, my TripAdvisor, Yelp, and Google rating is going to be 3 out of 5. The Food Adventures rating is only going to be 6.5 out of 10. So that was my review of Golden Corral down in Royal Palm Beach, Florida. If you have anywhere else you think I should review, make sure you leave it in the comments, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys.